Hello. I welcome each and every one of you to another session of Daniel Hayford's lecture on the part 2 of the theme, an overview of the environment, ecological systems or ecosystems, and the field of ecology as we know it today. Ladies and gentlemen, various populations interact with one another to develop what is called biological communities. A community of living organisms can also be referred to as a biotic community. It encompasses all the interdependent populations which are existing in a particular region, setting, or environment. Ecologically speaking, community includes the diversity of all living organisms of different species which are inhabiting a particular area. The question is, can a community contain two populations of the same species? The answer is a big no. A community cannot contain two populations of the same species. Instead, it can include populations of living organisms of different species. That is, the term community refers to several populations which interact, and it is such that changes in one population will cause changes in the others. 3 examples of communities are: 1. The Amstead Campus Community, 2. A forest community, and 3. A coral reef community. The Amstead Campus Community comprises of humans, various plant populations, including those which are classified as trees, shrubs, and grasses, the populations of animals such as cattle, goats, sheep, various fowls, pig, rabbit, and dogs, populations of insects such as cockroach, anopheles species, curious species, housefly, blackfly, and churchfly, and populations of reptiles such as snakes and lizards. Each of these and other biotic communities are strongly influenced by abundance and dispersal. A forest community encompasses all the tree species, the plant community in general, bird species, deer, fungi, fox species, insects, fish in forest rivers, rats, spiders, squirrels, and other local or seasonal species. Similarly, diverse algae, coral, and fish are found in a coral reef community. The subfield of ecology, which is concerned with studying the functioning and organization of biological communities, is known as community ecology. Ladies and gentlemen, community ecology is also concerned with the way members of biological community interact with their surroundings. Did you know biomes or habitats are often used to divide community ecology? Ladies and gentlemen, recall the fact that community ecology is a branch of ecology which deals with factors which affect species composition and distribution of communities, and that it is and that it also deals with various factors which affect stability of communities in the various ecological systems found in the biosphere. In a nutshell, community ecology refers to the interactions among various species which influence the ecosystem's well-being, development, spread, and richness in the biosphere. Species of all living organisms characteristically rely on each other at the communal level. In most biological groups which have been explored by the community ecologists, there are various short food chains. Did you know the term habitat refers to a specific ecological area which is inhabited by specific living organisms, including plants and animal species? Or it is the environment of an organism, that is, the place where it is usually found. In other words, an organism's habitat is where it lives in the community. Ladies and gentlemen, you need to learn about something called ecological niche. Did you know the term ecological niche is defined as the status or position and the role which a living organism plays in its community, including its habitat and how it interacts with other living organisms in the community? Ecological niche includes all biotic and abiotic interactions as a living organism meets its needs or requirements for survival. If two species are competing for the same niche, one will most likely drive the other out and take control. Ladies and gentlemen, you need to also know about what we call interspecific and intraspecific interactions. To begin with, take note of the fact that interspecific interactions are essential to community structure. Competition, parasite-host relationships, predator-prey relationships, and commensalistic relationships, for example, help in organizing population into an intricate dynamic system. These interspecific interactions are classified based on their impact on interacting populations. Competition, for example, may occur when a shared resource in a given area is limited in nature. It is defined as the rivalry between populations for the same resources, including light, space, nutrients, or mates. Barnacles competing on the Scottish coastline may be an example of present ongoing competition known in the world of ecology. Ladies and gentlemen, the competitive exclusion principle states that no two species can indefinitely occupy the same niche together. Let's turn our attention to something called character displacement. Did you know character displacement is a structural change which gives proof of resource partitioning and niche specialization? Ladies and gentlemen, what is resource partitioning and niche specialization. Do your research and leave your answer on the YouTube video. When natural resources are partitioned between two or more species of living organisms, increased niche specialization occurs. Yet, the difference between species can be subtler than one can imagine, as seen when warbler bird species feed at different parts of the tree canopy. Earlier on, you learned about herbivores and herbivory under the course titled Diversity of Living Things. Did you know herbivory leads to various adaptations in plant species? In fact, certain herbivore-plant interactions show coevolution or reciprocal evolutionary adaptations. Ladies and gentlemen, what is coevolution? The term coevolution refers to an evolutionary change in which adaptations in one species act as a selective force on a second species, including adaptations that in turn act as a selective force on the first species. That is to say that coevolution is a mutual influence on the evolution of two different interacting species. Predation too, ladies and gentlemen, leads to various adaptations in prey population or species. Predation too, ladies and gentlemen, leads to various adaptations in prey species. Predator-prey interactions between two species are particularly influenced by amount of predation and amount of food available for the prey. A cycling of population densities may occur in the various communities which characterize the world's ecological systems. Population cycling have been found to reveal some considerable patterns which challenge ideas about the balance of nature. A population cycle has been defined as a roughly periodic variation over time in the size or composition of a population. It is a phenomenon where populations rise and fall over a predictable period of time. There are various species of living things where population numbers have reasonably predictable patterns of change, albeit the full reasons for population cycles is a key unsolved ecological problem. Be that as it may, population cycles have fascinated various ecologists, and the causes of the high amplitude multi-annual fluctuations in abundance have been the subject of fervent debate for decades. Prey defenses may occur in several forms, with camouflage, mimicry, the use of fright and warning coloration being some of the possible mechanisms. There are two types of mimicry. They are 1. the Bartesian mimicry, and 2, the Mullerian mimicry. Bartesian mimicry occurs when one species has the warning coloration but does not have the defense, whereas Mullerian mimicry is when two species with the same warning coloration have the same defense. In other words, mimicry is part of possible defense mechanisms. And that is to say that prey defenses may occur in several forms, with camouflage, the use of fright, and warning coloration being 3 of the possible mechanisms. Note that coevolution is expected to occur within a community. For example, the better the predator gets at catching the prey, the better the prey gets at escaping from the predator. Like predators, parasites take nourishment from their hosts. Ladies and gentlemen, living organisms form relationship with each other through various biological interactions. A biological interaction is the effect that a pair of living things living together in a particular ecological community have on each other. The living organisms involved in biological interactions can be either of the same species or of different species. Where the biological interactions involve living organisms of the same species, the interactions are said to be intraspecific interactions. And when the living things involved belong to different species, the biological interactions are referred to as interspecific interactions. The effects of biological interactions may be short-term or long-term in nature, and both usually strongly influence the adaptation and evolution of the species of living organisms involved. Biological interactions range from mutualism, which is known to be beneficial to both partners, to competition, which is harmful to both partners. Ladies and gentlemen, biological interactions can be said to be direct when physical contact is established, or indirect when it occurs through various intermediaries such as shared resources, territories, metabolic waste, toxins, growth inhibitors, and ecological services. This relationship can be demonstrated by net effects based on individual effects on both living things arising out of relationship. The term symbiosis can be defined as a type of a close and long-term biological interaction which occurs when two biological organisms of different species called symbionts, be it mutualism or mutualistic, commensalistic, or parasitic. Beg your pardon. The term symbiosis can be defined as a type of a close and long-term biological interaction which occurs between two biological organisms of different species called symbionts, be it mutualistic, commensalistic, or parasitic. This means symbiosis includes parasitism, mutualism, and commensalism. The term symbiosis is at times employed in the more restricted sense of a mutually beneficiary interactions whereby both symbionts contribute in some way to each other's support. In symbiotic relationships, in the general use of the term, the living things involved belong to different species but live in direct contact with each other, and at least one of the symbionts is dependent on the other in some way. Symbiosis can be obligatory or facultative in nature. A symbiotic relationship is said to be obligatory when one or more of the symbionts depend on each other for survival. For example, to secure a habitat, that is, a place to live, or to complete a life cycle. When symbiosis is said to be facultative, it means that it is optional, and that means that the symbionts can generally live independently. Accordingly, symbiotic relationships are classified using a criterion called physical contact or attachment. Symbiotic relationships are classified using a criterion called physical attachment. It is this mode of classification which gives rise to terms such as ectosymbiosis and endosymbiosis, as well as conjunctive and disjunctive symbiosis. The conjunctive type of symbiosis occurs when the symbionts form a single body, while disjunctive symbiosis encompasses all other arrangements. The conjunctive type of symbiosis occurs when the symbionts form a single body, while disjunctive symbiosis encompasses all other arrangements. Ectosymbiosis occurs when one organism lives on the surface of another, such as head lice on human beings. In contrast, endosymbiosis occurs when one partner lives inside the cells, tissues, or generally inside the body of the other partner, such as symbiodinium within coral. Parasites and pathogens can affect community composition in the sense that parasites may be aggressive to the extent of killing their host, or they may be benign in nature. Whether parasites may be aggressive or benign may possibly depend on which of the two leads to the highest fitness. Be that as it may, the death of a host is not a selective advantage to the parasite. Mutualism benefits both partners. Nevertheless, mutualistic kind of symbiotic relationships are built on the same genetically selfish principles as antagonistic interactions. Essentially, the various mutualistic interactions seem to have developed from antagonistic interactions. In other words, no species of living organism is altruistic or unselfish or selfless towards promoting the good of another. Mutualisms develop as species of living organisms which come in contact, manipulate each other for their own gain. Mutualisms develop as species of living organisms which come in contact, manipulate each other for their own gain. Plant species, for example, develop certain mixtures and concentrations of nectar to lure pollinators to act in ways that maximize pollination. It is only for their own gain that pollinators choose to visit plants and navigate among them to harvest nectar or pollen in the most effective way ever. The concern of the pollinators is not with how well they perform as pollinators for the plant species. Instead, their concern is about what they can extract from the plant species. In spite of that, we can still afford to say that mutualism occurs when the selfish activities of species profit each one of them. And it is natural selection which keeps reshaping these interactions as each species develops its ability to exploit the other for its own advantage. Ladies and gentlemen, mutualistic relationships such as when Clark's nuthatches feed on and disperse white-back pine seeds are critical to the cohesiveness of a community. Trophic structure is a critical factor in community dynamics. Yes, we are turning our attention to trophic structure, and the first point here is that trophic structure is a critical factor in community dynamics. It can be represented by a food chain in which the producers are eaten by the primary consumers are eaten by secondary consumers are eaten by tertiary consumers, and these tertiary consumers are fed on by the quaternary consumers. Food chains interact to form food webs. Ladies and gentlemen, species composition is defined as the different species in a community, whereas species diversity includes relative abundance and species richness. Accordingly, diversity covers the number of species in a community and the population of the community that each species represents. I beg your pardon. Diversity covers the number of species in a community and the proportion of the community that each species represents. Ladies and gentlemen, there is a kind of species called keystone species. A keystone species has a disproportionate impact on diversity due to its low relative abundance or biomass. Yet, its removal from a community results in lower species diversity. Ladies and gentlemen, gratitude for enjoying the part 2 of Daniel Hayford's lecture on the theme, an overview of the environment, ecological systems, and the field of ecology as we know it today. You are respectfully invited to subscribe to the DH Media GH. Leave your comments and questions, and the questions shall be attended to shortly. Thank you very much.